Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in in emerging technologies, digital assets, a regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me on the desk at the Nasdaq market site, we have Kirk Edelman, CEO of SolMicroGrid, as well as Amir Dossal, President and CEO of the Global Partnerships Forum with United Nations. We're here to discuss unlocking climate finance at scale for developing and underserved markets, particularly within energy infrastructure. It is great to have the both of you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks. And before we get into the thick of the conversation, Kirk, give us some background on SolMicroGrid, where you fit within the ecosystem.
Sure. SolMicroGrid develops microgrids, no surprise there. A microgrid is like a small power company. It provides power to a host site. It might be a building, it might be a university campus, it might be a municipality. But the beauty of microgrids is that they have the capability to operate independent of the main electricity grid. So when you lose grid power, your microgrid system is able to kick in and you can do your day-to-day business uninterrupted.
Yeah. Is that almost like a generator? Or functions as like a generator?
Exactly. We provide generation, that's very, very important, but we also provide batteries, which provide us with certain other benefits. And the ability to have a generator or a fuel cell, some source of power generation, so that if you lose grid power, your business, your university can operate totally uninterrupted, and that has a lot of value in itself.
Yeah, no, it certainly does. And Amir, tell us about the work at Global Partnerships Forum.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. This is a very important dialogue. What we do is we build public-private partnerships to support the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals. Those are aspirational goals at the end of the day. And when they were set in place in 2015, we estimated that it would cost about 2.5 trillion a year. Today, that cost has gone up to 4 trillion. The bulk of it remains in the climate area, that we do not have enough funding for climate. There's something like $2.4 trillion needed to address the mitigation gaps, the gaps in terms of resilience and so on.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting because we talk about climate tech here on the show quite frequently, and a lot of the solutions and the problems they're looking to solve, it seems quite obvious that investment should take place. So how can we unlock climate finance at scale for developing and being able to achieve these goals?
So the challenge has been that the projects which are out there are not what I'd call investment ready. They're not packaged in a way where investors can say, I'm enticed by it, I'm very interested. So we need to help the recipients, the stakeholders, to put together a package which is attractive to the investor, attractive to family offices, maybe philanthropists, companies who want to invest. Because the bottom line is, if they don't know they'll get return on capital properly, or return of capital, if there are inadequate guarantees on the projects itself in the country, if they can't repatriate foreign exchange, for example, those things and lack of governance makes it difficult for people to go there.
Yeah, it certainly does. And Kirk, Amir brings up a good point in understanding who your audience is and how to effectively communicate that. These projects are capital intensive. They do take time. You're not going to see your return in 12 to 18 months. So what's the broader opportunity for a private equity firm, as an example, within energy transition?
You know, that's a great question, Jill, because when I first got into this business, you didn't see private equity as an investor. You know, when you looked at someone who was not, who was looking to invest in a typical energy project, you know, as exotic as you got was an institutional investor, an insurance company or a pension fund. But I'd say, what, in the last 10, 15 years, the private equity community has become a major force in providing equity capital to support these projects.
Yeah, well, I also think the demand from investors for alternative products is also a catalyst behind that. I mean, for example, Morgan Stanley Energy Partners, they've empowered SolMicroGrid. Explain to us what that has allowed your company to do.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't do anything without their backing. 100% of my capital comes from Morgan Stanley Energy Partners, the private equity vehicle that they use to invest in this space. And the wonderful thing about private equity nowadays is not only do they come with extremely deep pockets, that everyone knows that, but they also typically have staffs that are incredibly knowledgeable of our industry. They know about energy, and the energy industry is an industry that can get somewhat complicated and technical, but these folks not only bring the deep pockets to make our types of projects happen, but they also bring a knowledge base and a skill set that complements what my team does.
Yeah. Amir, why not traditional investing, right? How come it's been removed from these innovations in this technology that has a lot of promise?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Traditional investment works in most cases, but when it comes down to local population in the villages and, if you like, in the suburbs, it's been a challenge because the local government doesn't exist to provide that counterpart capacity. So that's when sometimes blended finance kicks in, for example. Sometimes a combination of philanthropy and risk capital come in. So we really need to de-risk the capital.
Yeah.
De-risk the investment in a way that they might turn around and say, yes, I see value proposition, I'll put money in, and a little bit of patient capital as well is needed.
Right.
Because they cannot expect returns in 2 to 3 years overnight, for example.
I mean, that's a great point that you make, having that local expertise. These investments should benefit the communities as well. We're leveraging their resources, and I think that's an important distinction to make. But it sounds to me as these multi-stakeholder partnerships or public-private partnerships, this is going to be the way forward as it relates to financing. You're going to need alternative forms of capital.
So actually, this is what we do. I'm part of a group called the Global Resilience Partners, which helps smaller countries, really landlocked countries, small island developing countries, to build their own capacity. So what we do is we try and bring private capital into play, bring kind of natural elements to it to see how they might adjust their policies as well. They need better governance. They need to make themselves more attractive to the investor. They're used to working within their own sphere. And now increasingly, I'm very pleased to see that these smaller countries are coming to the UN and saying, help us engage with the private sector so that we can talk to private equity firms, for example. They speak their same language almost.
Which is so interesting, Kirk, because we're developing areas are around the world. They don't have these infrastructure and so forth. They could potentially leapfrog as it relates to this newer technology that's being made available. But we were talking off camera before, your experience has been working in local markets. And that particular expertise, you can see, how important that is to understand how the frameworks work.
Yep, yep. The thing you deal with when you start going to new markets is you have to mitigate risk. That's the whole story behind this type of financing. And in some markets, you don't have the legal system. Right. You don't have the commercial contractual framework typically available. Right. And then you have the whole host of country risks. So you can have a terrific project someplace that checks all the boxes, but it might be, for example, one example, in a country where the country risk is such that it's very, very difficult to attract this third-party capital.
Yeah, especially if you are dealing with governments that have a reputation for being corrupt and resources aren't being allocated where they're supposed to go. And at the end of the day, Kirk, it comes down to the economics, right?
Absolutely. Lisa, that's so important. No matter where I've done this kind of business, at the end of the day, you have to have projects that are going to be economically viable.
Yeah. What are some examples or success stories of energy finance innovations that you think could be scaled or adapted in different regions?
So there are a number of areas where multi-stakeholder partnerships tend to work. Rockefeller Foundation, for example, does a lot of good work on energy capacity building, energy transition. So what they do is they try and help smaller countries address their governance gaps, transparency issues. You mentioned about the issue of governments being corrupt, etc. Sub-Saharan Africa gets only 5% of the investments. Right. For the same reason. Right. I don't know whether I can get anywhere with them. So that's the perception, if you like. So they need to change that perception. And that's where the UN is trying to do that. UN is trying to build capacity for those governments to say, just have a better reporting system, a transparent system in place, actually. So what are the types of things which work? It's when countries like India and Indonesia come together, and I think, Kirk, we talked about it early on, what Siemens and GE and others are doing. These are major infrastructure projects which are also backed by the US government in the past, through the PREPARE program, which is a presidential program. Also DFC, for example, Development Finance Corporation. That will guarantee some elements of it, but extract some accountability from governments.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the obvious challenges that exist.
Yes. And it's not easy
Right.
to extract that accountability.
Yeah.
And that's where MCC, Millennium Challenge Corporation, for example, looks for better democratic systems in place, better reporting, transparency, using new technology, using better kind of blockchain systems.
Yeah.
Those are starting to come together now. All of a sudden, some of the smaller countries are saying, we'll provide blockchain systems, you can verify them independently, and if you see it's worthwhile, please come to us.
Yeah, I mean, look at what blockchain and the underlying infrastructure has done just for micro economies that don't have traditional banking systems, and they're leveraging that for cross-border payments or stablecoins so they can invest in different areas. Treasuries, as an example, in the U.S. Right, so they're growing micro economies, and these types of technologies, whether it's climate, financial, or otherwise, you can't fall behind with that. It's such a massive addressable market.
Yeah, no, agreed. The one commonality in the energy infrastructure space is that it takes a lot of money to do our kinds of projects. And so attracting that kind of capital to do a major energy or infrastructure project takes, multiple markets.
Yeah.
And you have to address as many markets as possible. And those markets have to be dependable, and they have to move relatively quickly so that we can continue to make forward progress.
Yeah, it's almost like the chicken or the egg, what comes first? This has to happen at scale to make it more affordable, but if you don't get the investment at scale, right? It's like, how do I get a job if I don't have the experience? Remember that commercial? Wait, how do I get experience if I can't get a job?
Yes. It's catch-22, actually.
Right.
Your point about engaging them, I think our experience has been sitting them on the table and saying, okay, if we are candid with you, here's what is missing on your side. What are the ways you can change that? What are the ways you can have transparency and greater accountability? How can you build your government's capacity, but also private sector capacity? Because you do need transparency on both sides.
Right.
That's when the relationship starts to get better on kind of a one-on-one basis or a few people together.
Right. Well, I mean, also, again, remembering who your audience is. If you're talking to a local government, okay, what's in it for me? How does it benefit my constituents?
Right.
That's the kind of language I want to hear. If you get too technical or you're behind the engineering or the design, like me, my face would go blank. But I think understanding your audience and building trust within the local communities. I used to cover African markets before working here at Nasdaq, and at that time, the mantra was from aid to trade to institutional investment. And to get to that third level, these things need to be put into place. 100%. Functioning central banking systems, blockchain technology, to your point.
Yes. And aid to trade has been a real challenge, actually, at the end of the day. But UNCTAD, who keeps track of some of these records, actually, has found that some of the smaller countries, and mind you, COVID hasn't helped either.
Right.
That's set them back a little bit. But now we are saying, let's turn this over its head. Let's ask the countries, say, what can you do to present yourself? So, for want of a better word, beautify yourself and make yourself attractive to Wall Street and Main Street.
Yeah. I mean, it's a circular economy. It's only going to go back into the economy and grow it. Let's talk about the technology for a moment here, Kirk. SolMicroGrid, as an example, is it available mass market, or what's the timeline? What are your expectations in terms of meeting these goals?
Yeah, the beauty of our value proposition, our business model, is that we are technology agnostic. So every time I do a project, I'm looking into the market with OEMs to find what's the best available technology that will perform best and be the most cost effective for my customer. And the nice thing about that is the energy business evolves rapidly. So a great example was a few years ago, maybe 5-6 years ago, a basic module solar panel was about 200 watts. Fast forward a few years, now it's 600 watts. We use both sides, we call them bifacial, and they're cheaper than those original 200 watt ones were just a few years ago. So when you have that kind of innovation and technical performance improvements, it makes it easier to use the best performing, the best prices, and get the best possible results for our customer.
It just seems like it's obvious, not to be flippant, but we have so much demand, whether it's AI, digital assets, all these emerging technologies that are being deployed, and the grids can't support that. So how do you triage where it goes, right? As an example, the issues that Texas had, as an example, and there's a lot of tech companies and a lot of growth there in that area, but they need the grid to support it. So, having a microgrid seems to eliminate some of that risk or that nervousness around it. How do you triage where this power goes?
Now, Jill, you're spot on with that, because you look at our system and most systems in the world, and you have central generation, and you have a load that's spread out over a wide area, and so you centrally generate, and you got to get it to your customers, the end users, your ratepayers, and that requires transmission and distribution wires. No one is, I think there's a couple of basic facts that no one can refute. One is the world is going more and more to using electricity as its source of power. Everything's becoming electrified. At the same time, because you have central generation and a lot of wires, you look at that transmission distribution network and it's underinvested. The third issue, which is hard to argue against, is severe weather events are increasing. When you look at the outcome of the severe weather events, it tends to disrupt that transmission distribution network, and therefore the power can't get to where it's being used. And that creates a real vulnerability that we have to deal with. And the answer is to go more distributed. And that's why distributed energy resources, which is the backbone of what we do with putting together a microgrid, they're getting a lot more attention, because I think most people are coming to realize that trend.
So it removes the utility.
It removes our dependence on wires. So if you're building some sort of project like AI, a data center that uses a tremendous amount of power, they need not only a tremendous amount of power, but it's got to be extremely reliable.
Right.
Like the 5 nines you hear about. And in order to do that, they are relying increasingly on not only being connected to the grid, but having another alternative when the grid's not available. And that's the definition of what a microgrid is there to do.
Yeah. And to wrap up here, Amir, if you take a 5-10 year look out, how positive are you feeling about things? Can some of these aggressive goals be met?
Well, I think we can achieve them. The only thing is that we need to take all of the actions into place. I love the idea of the microgrid, for example. In Africa, as you've probably seen, there's pay-as-you-go solar systems, for example. Power Africa, which the US started some years ago. Those are kinds of initiatives which are built from ground up. And if they're built like that, then there's chances of sustainability. And of course, I'm biased. We need to bring together family offices, private investors, philanthropists, and so on. So at the UN, as I mentioned, there's the Nature Summit event taking place in September. We also have a public foundation which does amazing work in bringing family offices together, investors, and island resilience partners, which helps, if you like, small islands come together and build their own capacity. So we let them own the solution, if you like.
When you are working with these local governments, are the constituents involved? Are they part of the project? Are they being skilled to execute on the project? Because again, you don't just want aid, you want to be able to be, not sustainable from the climate perspective, but sustainable in terms of long-termism.
100%. We rely on the constituents, basically, because if they tell us that this is how we want to address this problem, we really have to listen to them. Yeah. All too often in the past, we've said, I can tell you how it's done, but
right.
I have no idea. But I get prescriptive. We cannot get prescriptive. We have to listen to them. We have to understand the culture, how the dynamics work, and how it can help the community.
All right, appreciate both of your insights. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. And thanks for joining me from MarketSite. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.